Hey everyone, this is Pyro, and today we'll be going over Sheild can as well as stored knockback in neutral. For this video, it will be done live as there's a lot of explaining to do. So the first thing for Sheild can that we have to understand is that it is meant to protect Duck Hunt from attacks that are usually safe on Sheild. As you can see by Wolf throwing his F smash on Duck Hunt's shield while can is overlaid on it, Wolf will get punished by the explosion of can. And if your opponent has a little bit of percent, one thing we can even do is follow up the explosion of can into a bigger punish for a combo. The next thing to know is that there is 3 different ways we can set up a Sheild can. The first one is if we have the can in front of Duck Hunt. One of the things about having can in front of Duck Hunt though is that if can is sticking out a little, then it can be poked with projectiles to hit back into his own shield and not prevent anything. What we have to understand here is that we can have our shield slightly hovering over the can, and by doing this, we can protect it from projectiles. However, if we are not fully lined up with can and have it slightly in front of us, an opponent character can shoot projectiles at the can and send it back into Duck Hunt. This is something that you don't want for Duck Hunt, as it makes his shield can ideas a bit weaker in neutral. The next idea we can have then is to avoid that situation. We can have our shield hover over can. This protects can a bit. This works a little bit best if Duck Hunt is exactly right on top of his can. The issue here, however, is that by doing this, Duck Hunt will end up taking a lot of shield damage trying to protect his can from opponent projectiles. The third option we can use is to have Duck Hunt stand in front of his can instead. What ends up happening here is that we protect ourselves still by having shield can, except we're not allowing can to be hit by opponent projectiles. Having can behind us like this works very well against avoiding dash attacks. If your opponent is being smart, one of the ways they can beat Sheild can is by grabbing Duck Hunt, and then using the invincibility on their throw to avoid the can. As we can see here with Wolf, all of his throws have frames of invincibility to avoid the can. However, if Duck Hunt is aware and he knows that his opponent is using this option to avoid anchor can, Duck Hunt can wait on his explosion for can and punish the end leg of the throw instead. If the opponent is very aware of what's going on, however, they can use a hitbox attached to their throw to blow up their can during iframes and deal extra damage to Duck Hunt while still protecting themselves. As you can see there, Wolf used his claw to explode the can while still protecting himself during his invincibility frames, and the explosion of can did extra damage to Duck Hunt. One of the things your opponent might do if they do not know the tech of using iframes to protect themselves during throws, to deal with shield can, is that they might end up pummeling. If your opponent does this, know that it's a free escape option for Duck Hunt. If your opponent always likes to pummel before throws, then that means that they aren't aware of this tech for exploding can using iframes and not protecting themselves. If your opponent isn't aware of this tech, then feel more comfortable about letting yourself get grabbed by opponents that aren't protecting themselves without the use of iframes. The next tech I'd like to go over now is anchor can. So now that we've established anchor can, one thing we can do now is we can go back to this older idea of shielding in front of the can, because the can will not be pushed back into Duck Hunt. If you are wondering where this tech of anchor can comes from, I recommend checking out the bug glitch video that I made for patch 5.0. The important thing we can understand about setting up this anchor can is that by setting up anchor can, Duck Hunt no longer has to worry about projectiles being used to disrupt his shield can ideas. the can will not be pushed back into Duck Hunt for an explosion. One thing that our opponent might do to deal with this is that the opponent might try to jump over and use cross-up aerials to deal with this situation, since they have now lost access to disrupting Anchor Can with projectiles. Another thing your opponent might do, however, if you have successfully set up an Anchor Can, is to not approach at all, and just wait farther back without using any type of projectiles. If your opponent goes for this method, however, there is something that you can do to still push an advantage with Duck Hunt with your Anchor Can. But before we learn how to push this advantage with Anchor Can, I have to show you that there's two different types of Anchor Cans. The first one is if you set up an Anchor Can like this. Your opponent has anchored the can by initially pushing it away with a projectile. If this has happened, then the direction of Anchor Can will be pinged towards Duck Hunt in this situation. This is not the ideal situation that you want for Duck Hunt. Now let's look at the situation where we store Anchor Can on the initial hit. Now in the past, we saw that in this situation, the can should be pinged towards Duck Hunt. But in this situation, it gets pinged towards Wolf. What you see here is that by Duck Hunt being able to store Anchor Can on the initial projectile hit while it's still in the air, the ping direction of Can will still follow its original trail because the stored angle that sends it towards Duck Hunt has not been activated yet. This is stored knockback ping carryover, and it's another thing that I showed during the bug glitch exhibition video for patch 5.0. The important thing to understand about the ping carryover tech is how it lets Duck Hunt approach after he sets up the Anchor Can. So let's look at this with the two different versions. In the first version, stored knockback has started after the first hit of a projectile while Can was on the ground. If it's done like this, the Can will ping towards the left. However, if the Can is stored in the air, then it will ping towards the right. That's because the Can hasn't technically been hit by any move that will activate its stored knockback yet. We can use this to our advantage, however. By using the first method of storing knockback, what you end up seeing is that, well, Duck Hunt isn't really in a position to move forward. Although he has prevented his opponent from using projectiles in neutral, he can't really incorporate Can into his neutral because Can will always be pinged towards the left. However, if we use the other method, then Duck Hunt can approach with this Sheild Can stored knockback because Can will ping towards the right. The important thing about understanding Can being pinged towards his opponent with this aerial stored knockback version is that if Can is being pinged towards the right by this aerial stored knockback version, if your opponent gives up on the idea of trying to approach on Duck Hunt, then Duck Hunt still has the ability to start approaching his opponent from the corner. Duck Hunt doesn't have this ability if he has stored knockback, if he has anchored his Can in the other version, however. If we see it in this version, if Duck Hunt tries to approach on his opponent, he has to move his Can forward. Yet his Can will always go behind him because of the properties of Anchor Can. However, by doing the other version of this, it's a different set of properties that have activated because there has not been an initial move that has set the direction, that has changed Duck Hunt's initial direction yet, because Duck Hunt has stored the first initial hit of his opponent's attack. Whereas in the second version, or in the first version, where Can is being pinged, or Can is being hit by the laser and moving to the left, Can has already been set on the leftward direction because of that first laser hit. However, when we look at it in this way, Can hasn't had its direction changed yet by any form of move. So if the opponent tries to continue to pelt this with projectiles, remember that Can has become invincible in this case. And because Can is invincible, it has not changed its set path yet. So by doing this form of anchor can in neutral, Duck Hunt has the ability to start approaching on his opponent in the corner. Now, this is a bit of a mess to understand what's going on. Duck Hunt is using a glitch to establish his neutral, and then using another glitch to turn that setup into an aggressive option. What ends up happening here is that if we use the first version of anchor can, then Duck Hunt loses his ability to make a push towards his opponent, because pinging the can will always send it behind him, or trying to push the can forward with an attack will also send it behind him, as it will activate the stored knockback. However, if we set up the other version, then as you can see, Duck Hunt can't attack his can with physical attacks to try and push it forward. However, because of the glitch of ping carryover, Duck Hunt can ping his can forward to try and approach on the opponent. The important thing to understand here is establishing the center first with an anchor can. By establishing the center with the anchor can, the opponent cannot challenge your center position with projectiles, and they can't challenge it with attacks either. The important thing to understand here then is that once you set up this center position with anchor can, that Duck Hunt has both a projectile wall and a physical attack wall that your opponent must get through. And because of this, most opponents will like to just stay time in the corner to try and just wait out the can explosion to not having to deal with either of these options. However, if your opponent decides to go to the corner to not deal with an anchored shield can, once we set up this correct version of anchored shield can, what we can begin to do is make a push against our opponent towards the corner, because the ping direction of the can is now in the right direction. As you can see, while the whole idea about shield can is that it's able to establish a position for Duck Hunt, ideally you want that position to be in the center. We can push that position forward if we do this method of anchor can. And the ability to push the can forward in this situation, to push our wall forward and approach our opponent, cannot be done with this version of anchor can. The version where stored knockback has been stored when the can was on the ground. That is why it is important for Duck Hunt to learn this timing that allows his can to be stored in the air. By doing this timing, Duck Hunt has the correct direction of the way he wants the can to be pinged towards, and because of this, Duck Hunt is able to approach upon his opponent after setting up a defensive position in the center of the stage with shield can. The next important thing to incorporating stored knockback in neutral is to set up a stored knockback can while your opponent is respawning. So what we've done is that by storing the knockback on the can while the opponent is respawning, when they come down and try to hit the can out of the way, as you can see, by setting up stored knockback on the can while your opponent is respawning, you have a predictable direction of where the can will always go after your opponent hits it during a respawn invincibility. The important thing about doing this is that you will always know the direction the can will go if it's hit after you have stored knockback. This makes it not ambiguous and not hard to know what will end up with the can, where the can will end up going after your opponent respawns. By not setting up a stored knockback can during respawn invincibility, your opponent has free range to hit the can back at you when they respawn. There are 5 good moves to store knockback with during your opponent's respawn invincibility. Ideally, you want to store knockback with either your down tilt or your up tilt. The idea here is that after your can gets hit in neutral, as soon as your opponent comes down with respawn invincibility, you want it in a position where it can come close to Duck Hunt. That's why storing knockback with up smash and down smash is less ideal, because it will be pushed right back into Duck Hunt's face after respawn invincibility. Storing knockback during opponent's respawn invincibility is a tech that has been mainly implemented through Duck Hunt player LYC, and I'll link his Twitter down below in the description. The next thing I need to show you here is fixing Can's direction after it has stored knockback. In this case, we can't hit Can with a physical move because it will push it behind us, and we can't ping the Can because it will push it behind us. So instead, a move that we can use to fix the position is F Smash. Now what ends up happening here is that because we're using multiple ping hitboxes on the can with F Smash, we're able to move it forward when physical moves and the ping direction don't work correctly. This is, however, not needed if Can has been stored in this way because the ping direction is still in the correct direction for us. Hey everyone, just to make sure there's a volume warning coming up. Credit to White Husky for the footage here. This mechanic deals with Duck Hunt's overheat. Depending on which character owns the can will either immediately explode or delay its explosion. Can ownership is a very strange mechanic that determines techs like Anchor Can and opponent stored knockback. When Duck Hunt pings the can ownership will return to him, and that is why pings will disrupt Anchor Can. However, pings do not stop stored knockback, and that is how stored knockback ping carryover works. Thus, stored knockback and can ownership are two mechanics that combine together to create the glitch that is Anchor Can. And while Duck Hunts have gotten a better understanding of how stored knockback works, understanding can ownership is still a great mystery. As you can see in the long clip here, Duck Hunt and Falco continue to pass around the ownership of the can between themselves, and thus changing the properties of the can. This is how critically important it is to know how stored knockback works. In this case here, Raito stores knockback on Rob's top. Because of the direction the top came at the can, the next time the can is hit, it should always be sent towards the left. Here we can see Raito fall through the platform, and then shield a top, and then shield Rob's laser. Rob's laser then travels through Raito's shield, hits Can, activates stored knockback, and hits him behind. This loses Raito stage control, and ultimately loses Raito both the game and the set. Raito hasn't learned or implemented stored knockback yet in Ultimate, and these are the types of game-defining moments that can lose you sets because of it. Mastering stored knockback by being able to immediately recognize it and using the stored angle within the can is the biggest step to removing unpredictability from Duck Hunt's gameplay. It's the difference between losing a game to a glitch or using that glitch to advance your own gameplay.